Hello, viewers. It's great to see you here on Lee TV. I'm talking with Grant Abraham, and he's speaking to us from Durham, Ontario. He is the leader of the United Party of Canada, which he founded after a bid to become the Conservative Party leader. So, welcome to the show, Grant.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I am just doing a little backup for this recording in an audio form and got that going. Grant, I want you to tell our viewers about your background and who is Grant Abraham?
Sure. Well, Grant Abraham is an everyday Canadian, not a career politician, happily married husband and father of four boys that are kind of the youngest ones in their mid-teens now, and the oldest one just got married this past year. So we have an amazing family, and I'm a person who has been watching the deterioration of the fundamental pillars in our country be kind of chipped away at and broken. And I think I'm here because I've seen that our nation has been compromising on truth. It's not having the conversations that render truth. And that means that if we don't have truth, we don't actually have any justice in our country. And so my discussions about Canada and where we may go today are rooted in so many ways about the values, traditions, and culture of what this country's about, and how we need to be talking about those root issues again.
Can't argue with that. Would that be, you say, what brought you into the Conservative Party leadership race to forward change in those areas?
Yeah, it was. It was very much a case of me looking at what was going on in Canada and seeing that Justin Trudeau was telling Canadians that Canada was going to be a post-nation state. Justin Trudeau telling Canadians that COVID had provided an opportunity for a reset. David McGuinty, a Liberal MP, kind of breaking ranks almost, and going on YouTube and saying, we are being ravaged, my word, not his, but that's, I think, what he was saying, ravaged by foreign interference and foreign actors in our country, and the government's not engaging it. And those were questions that were very clear from the Liberals' perspective, because they were saying it, and that's where I have to give Justin Trudeau credit. He actually said those things in public to Canadians. My challenge, and I think which was part of the root system of why I ran, and also why I attained the support I did, was that people knew there was something desperately wrong in the country, but we weren't having the conversations about what those cellular, those deeper kind of issues were that were making us ask the question, where has our country gone? And the answer to that within the political party was, why is the Conservative Party of Canada not banging on the drum about any of these issues? So post-nation state, reset, foreign interference, that is low-hanging, easy fruit. And if there's a government or a government in waiting that seriously wants to attain power, they would seek to dislodge the existing government by asking those difficult questions. And yet all through 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, right up until 23, those questions were never asked. And I started to answer those questions for Canadians. I saw lights switching on in minds and hearts, and hope being brought. And I think that's why I ended up at the end of my Conservative leadership race crossing the line with in excess of the $300,000 required. And I think it was probably a surprise to the establishment within the party. And I think they had to find a way to hasten me out, because they did not want to have those conversations. We're still not having those conversations. And in a sense, that's why I and a group of other amazing Canadians across the country, to say that I founded it is, I suppose, technically true. It's a misnomer at a heart level, because there's been hundreds and thousands of Canadians that have embraced this discussion, and this is a coast to coast party.
Understood. And I think we've covered the next thing that I wanted to ask you about was how that went down, where, in your view, you had everything that they needed and they were just saying that you didn't. Am I
Yeah.
correct? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not really into to having a whine about it. I know you're not asking me to do that, but it did expose for me the significance of what was within the party, because what happened was there were basically two requirements to qualify in that race. One was 500 signatures from 30 electoral districts and 10 provinces, and the other one was $300,000 plus as an entry fee to be able to run and participate in that race. I attained the signatures as required. I have a letter from the Conservative Party of Canada verifying that process had completed with regard to attaining the signatures. And when I received the letter about the resources, the finances, I was told that I hadn't met the mark of the $300,000. Of course, I knew that was not the case, because I had the receipts, both in terms of what I had raised personally and sent in, and also what they had sent me back. And so I asked them, I challenged it, and I said, what is the number that you said no to base your no on, that I couldn't continue in this discussion or this race or as a candidate? And they wouldn't tell me, first of all. And then it became a discussion about, look, I just said, you're not in a position not to tell me. It's taxpayers' dollars. It's a federal, essentially a monitored by Elections Canada race. You need to disclose the number. And they finally said, well, it was something like, I don't remember the precise number, but it was around $240,000. I said, you know what? There's money missing. There's no way that's right. And they basically said, well, you prove it then. And I said, so you want me to prove where the money is inside your books when I don't have access to your books? And they said, yeah. And it was kind of a little bit of a, go away and be quiet kind of experience, right? So I actually hired a forensic accountant, and they found the money inside the Conservative Party's books that had been buried, or I don't know whether it was intentional or negligent. It was one of the two, obviously. And I went back to them and I said, look, you guys have a choice to make here. I found your money. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but I'm going to have a press conference, and I'm either going to thank you for allowing me to continue as a candidate in this race. I'm going to tell Canadians that you've lost, misplaced, or perhaps worse, $60,000 to undermine a democratic process in our nation. The press conference is in 3 or 4 days. Let me know what you want me to say. And I got an email, I don't know, an hour or 90 minutes before the press conference that essentially said, oh, we see the money, but now we've recounted your previously verified signature cards, and we can no longer verify your signatures, but we can't talk to you about why that is or what was wrong, and you can't repair it. And so I had calls from all over the country telling me why that happened and that I should sue. And that isn't the preferred way, I think, to deal with this, because it would only be a moral victory and would be irrelevant to the narrative, the actual public square discussion that our nation needs to be having. And so what I learned was that there was a imperviousness to truth and essentially a crookedness within how that was dealt with. And so I simply moved on and recognized that Canada right now is really under threat. Our nation is being deconstructed, and this is not just politics as usual. We do have forces now that are coming against the people of this nation, and it's deconstructing the fabric of our nation, and we're becoming weaker. We're losing our sovereignty, and our nation, as in the sense of a nation that we understand it, is becoming vulnerable to a anti-sovereign pro-globalist agenda. And the evidence is there to substantiate that, but no one wants to talk about it. We need to be talking about that. The conservatives are not talking about that. And this is why there's a new party, because when I talk about this, whether it's the freedom movement, whether it's the 53.3% of Canadians that identify as being Christian or other faiths, they know that there are value issues going on in our country that are under siege. Freedom of religion, primacy of parental authority, and actually all the other components that we've seen broken in terms of the balance of powers in our government not working, and the violation of charter issues that we thought would never be violated in our lifetimes. We have seen it in a shocking display in this last 3 years.
Well, I can't argue with you there. I went through some of that myself, looking at what I wanted to do when I ran in 2019, and I ended up running for the People's Party, even though I'd been a conservative staffer in past years. And right now, the pro-life organization has talked about how even on the convention floor, some of the policy and procedure things, some of those audio votes, that weren't counted, seemed like the other side was louder, and basically the party really wanted to keep control of its veto levers. So if they wanted to oust a candidate, they could, and of course that really takes the wind out of people, and I think is a disingenuous kind of process, because you have people like yourself who did it in the leadership, but you have people who at the constituency level have worked hard, raised memberships, thought they were working for a party in good faith, and then, no, thanks for all your work, but we're really not going to let you. And if it was going to be that way, they should have been more honest in the first place, and that's what I think of that. So how long was it before you decided, after that you were shuffled out of the leadership race, that you wanted to start the United Party?
We actually went to work to see if we could build some collaborative structures with some of the existing players that were out there at the time, and kind of forge the movement into those organizations. And we didn't find traction or alignment there with them. Some of them just weren't ready to go, and others weren't really interested in the conversation. And yet we have these forces going on in our nation which actually need a response. So since that, one of the people that had a federal party has had it removed or disqualified by Elections Canada.
Which one was that?
That was the True North Party. It was a standing federal party at that time, and we worked to have those conversations, and they weren't fruitful. They didn't create a response, and I think there's always an openness to those kinds of questions. I think with the People's Party of Canada, there's been efforts through what I would call lieutenants of Maxime Bernier to engage discussion. I think there's some philosophical problems in terms of the connection of the philosophical roots of the PPC with some of the policies right now, and how those actually integrate. And I think that that's a discussion that the leadership of the PPC really needs to have. And by that, I'm referring to the framework of libertarianism and how that relates to policies that respect life and or even discussions about pro-life. And so there would be a lot of people inside the PPC, as I would have looked at it when it was birthed, as a good idea in terms of being an advocate for freedom. And we kind of all recognized that we needed a response that spoke to freedom. But we did it was built under a libertarianism framework that essentially has its roots in humanism. And I struggle to have conversations about life if you recognize that we're created in the image of God, how that is what brings the sanctity of life. And if you simply have an infrastructure, a philosophical root system that's based on humanism, it makes it very difficult to argue and be an advocate for the inalienable right to life and the protection of the vulnerable. And And if those roots aren't connected to the branches, it becomes an anemic discussion, because they get broken down. Those arguments get broken down through compromises or slippery slopes, because it's always this tension of, well, I want to be free. Yeah, well, I want to protect the life. That means you have to suspend your freedom. And so this is the root conversation. I'm challenging the PPC with that right now. And I think there's a lot of great people in it, and a lot of friends I have, and a lot of people that are of faith. But we have to have these conversations and find the point to uniting in Canada. And going back to your earlier point about those issues being presented to the Conservative Policy conference that was run back late last year in Quebec. I mean, there were some good policies there, I think, that were advanced in terms of supporting the family, etc. But at the end of the conference, Pierre Poilievre says, well, there's no promise that any of these policies will ever make it into an election platform. So this is a real question. Why would you waste your time advocating for policy that will never come into an election platform? And this is where I think that many of Canadians have been tricked within the Conservative Party, because they're simply not having these conversations about the value system that came in from the reformers and the alliance people that formed the Conservative Party of Canada. And it's almost like they're abuse victims with Stockholm syndrome that are hanging around waiting for a discussion about these values, but the whole time their votes being taken and used, and they're kind of like, fluffed up a bit and made to feel okay when it comes time to an election, but the rest of the time their values are ignored. And the evidence for that is found in Pierre Poilievre's comments about Christine Anderson, as a vile racist, and she's there meeting with Christian MPs that are from the Conservative Party. There are some real dissonances and problems within the relationship between CPC HQ and a major portion of the membership of that party. And this is another part of the answer of why we're actually reconnecting to the Conservative people in Canada. And I ask the question, people ask me the question, they say, aren't you going to split the vote? I say, well, look at the success, the stunning success of damage. In fact, it's almost like a death cult what the Liberal Party has done in terms of advancing fentanyl, in terms of MAID, in terms of the damage to innocence in our nation. Look what they've done with the minority government in conjunction with the NDP and the Liberals. So these value conversations aren't being had within the Conservative Party. They need to be had in the nation. And if we need to form a new expression of conservatism in Canada that actually upholds the value framework that much of this nation was built upon, maybe people want to now remove, but a lot of Canadians don't. There needs to be a voice for it. And what does a win look like? I think a win looks like attaining enough seats to actually form a minority government until people wake up that the Conservatives have lost their way. And so, yeah, we can talk about fiscal conservatism. We can talk about getting you more apples. We can talk about more money in your pocket. All these kind of shallow offerings that appeal to a 30-second analysis of what I need to vote for, when the bigger issues are immigration, what the real costs of why we're having these inflation, interest rate spikes, why we can't buy houses, why our money is going overseas and not to take care of our veterans on the streets, why we have tent cities all across the country that has been unheard of in both yours and my lifetime, because we should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Why we don't have gas at 75 or 80 cents a liter. Why are food costs so high? It just goes on and on. But we're not actually having the intelligent conversations with the mass of Canadians who are just trying to, pay for life and educate their kids and mind their own business and live the dream that's supposed to be Canada. I want to see that dream brought back to Canadians, and we're not going to do it by these shallow, childlike, churlish conversations that were being offered by the Conservatives. That's why the party's been formed, so we can actually restore our freedom, secure our strength in this nation, and see our nation rebuilt. We need to reforge this and fix the constitutional issues that have allowed Justin Trudeau to do what he's done.
Understood. I'm looking through your policies, and I'm wondering, when you bring these forward to people at the doors, did they say, well, yeah, that's exactly what I want? Or, I hadn't thought about that. Take me through the range of reactions you get.
Well, that's a great question. I've had, and this is a truthful answer, I haven't had real criticism about those policies. In fact, I've heard an overwhelming resonance. I'm not giving them to NDP voters. I'm in quite a conservative riding, so I think there's a natural, intuitive connection to many of those policies. I think there's a feeling that they're refreshing to hear them articulated as clearly as they are. And as simply, it's not a 45-page book at the moment. Excuse me, it's 15 points that speak to a lot of issues that actually puts Canada and Canadians first, with a view to correcting and refreshing the positioning of our foundation stones in this nation and dismantling the threat. And it's deeply resonating with Canadians as we have these conversations, young and old.
Yeah, I'm looking through the list. I like a lot of what I see. I was curious when point 3 it says eliminate the ceding of lawmaking powers to the Supreme Court, ensuring elected parliamentarians are the only ones who may change the laws of Canada. So, what would the mechanism be by which you could ensure that that happens?
Well, I think that we need to have our lawmakers defining the scope of the Supreme Court. It used to be that when there were laws passed in a country, there would be legislation put in place and the words meant something. And I think over the last 40 or 50 years, there's been an agenda that has provided a much more fluid interpretation of what those words mean, that have an ideological perspective, to redesign those words to reflect the intention of the current populace in relation to what those words mean. And what it's meant is that the pillars of our society in terms of due process, or the innocent until proven guilty, or whatever other sector in our country you want to talk about, have been deteriorated and eroded. They call this doctrine the living tree concept or philosophy of interpretation that actually shifts and bends the legislative intention, the purpose of the legislation, to be bent towards the court's interpretation that's based on an ideological agenda. So that is why we're seeing decisions made that distort our understanding. That's why a great example of this exactly is the Trinity Western case, to do with the BC Teachers Union and them not wanting to allow Trinity Western graduates to advance into their professional training program because of their the religious orientation, the Christian orientation of that university. That went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said yes, they should be allowed to participate. Why not? They were approved university, and whatever the other arguments were for why that was the case. Basically, the same case happened when Trinity sought to open up a law school, a decade later, and the Supreme Court made an alternative decision based on essentially the same principles. And all of a sudden, we have an interpretation of value that was different from before. And of course, there's a lot of legal nuance. I'm sure if there were, 5 lawyers here, we could all argue about it for 2 days about what everything meant. But in principle, for your everyday Canadian, that's an example of a distortion that's been created by an ideological interpretation of law. And so,
understood. And so, well, my question is would you just sort of have a notwithstanding clause on every piece of legislation, or would you seek new constitutional thing to say that the courts cannot overrule it?
yeah, I think I'd be saying lawmakers make the law. The courts need to apply that law, and they're not going to have the same license to interpret every context. And if if they find themselves with a definition issue where they have their own ideological bias that wants to distend or change our understanding of the nation, they need to stay the proceedings and send it back to the legislative for a further discussion, or make a comment in their judgment that this is an anomaly based on context, and have the lawmakers actually strengthen the law or whatever. And I think there's mechanisms that can be done. But right now, we're having a situation where Canadians are looking at our legal system and saying, we don't trust that we're getting justice. This has to be fixed. And it starts with how we relate to the judiciary and what their mandate is, and what the framework of law that is established that needs to be applied and how it's applied. And I think what I'm saying is the legislative mandate is greater than Parliament is supreme.
Mhm. So when you're at the doors, the people are receptive. How many people do you think are going to end up voting for you in this by-election? Do you get many commitments at the door saying, yes, I will vote for you? Or is it more like, I'll think about it?
Well, we have people contacting us and say we'd like a sign to put on our garden, our front lawn, or whatever. And that's a good indicator. I'm seeing a lot of people breathe a sigh of relief and join and become a volunteer. It's a hard question to answer, because this is the substance of our formation has been out of Western Canada, although there has been support from across Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes as well. But a lot of the baseline energy has been in and around Alberta. And so for a new federal party to show up in central Ontario and run, it's quite a thing. It's quite an anomaly. I have personally been amazed at how receptive people are, because the discussion has been essentially, even from Liberal voters, not happy with what's happening to Canada from the Liberal government. They're saying that to me on the street. And they're kind of saying, well, maybe we can tolerate voting for the Conservatives. And then there's a lot of Conservatives voters that are talking about grassroots issues, why they're shut out. You alluded to it earlier. We've got policy being pushed down from the Conservative Party into communities, and not the grassroots raising up their issues into the Conservative Party to be advocates for them in our Parliament. And so there is kind of this, I'm going to vote for the Conservatives because they're the least worst choice, until we have a conversation. And there's a great advocacy that they are open to, which I think is amazing. And I'm basically saying, you know what? We've got bigger issues here. We've got regional problems. Western Canada is tired of being a colony of a colony. This is an opportunity for the Durham riding that has essentially been betrayed by Erin O'Toole. Canada was betrayed by the Conservative Party, with Erin O'Toole running as a true blue and then basically presenting an election platform in a federal election that felt like a Liberal. So the people, this is a hot topic in Durham because it's very close to home. There's an embarrassment with the party. The candidate that's running in the Durham by-election won't engage in public discussions. It's only party line. There's no debates. And I think they're seeking to ride along on the history of the Conservative Party and its coattails. But when you actually talk to the Conservative Party and they look at things like Bill C-4, which was the bill that criminalized parents or pastors or counselors who seek to pray for or to counsel kids out of gender transition or irreversible surgery to their genitalia, people are going, I can't believe that the Conservative Party unanimously voted for that. And there's a huge disconnect out there when they're actually presented with the truth on the value discussions. And so while the Conservative Party is constantly talking about more money in your pocket and housing and all this stuff, the actual bedrock values of what this nation's about, parental authority, religious freedom, the dream of being able to come and raise your family in the way that you would wish to have them raised, are constantly being undermined by duplicitous policies of the Conservative Party. And it's actually deceptive, because they will say, we support family values. Yet if they're presented, which they will be, with this discussion around C4, it's a sham. How do you say we're going to protect family values and the protection of our kids, and then there's a unanimous passing of Bill C4? Every Conservative voter that I talk to about that, or I give them a flyer that outlines what that is turning their minds around, because they're seeing the compromise. That's what I'm seeing on the street. There's a house built on sand, a house divided in the moral structure, the value framework of the Conservative Party of Canada, and Canadians are catching on, and they're not just going to accept this shallow value discussion about more money.
Right. And so what I hear is, instead of a libertarianism that you want to pursue things from a Christian perspective. Now, if that's wrong, you can correct me. But I'm also wondering, if someone is not a person of faith, how do you assure them that what you're doing is still in their interest?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that I'm trying to advance a Christian perspective. What I'm trying to do is advance a Canadian perspective, which is, this nation is founded upon the principles that are based on the supremacy of God and the rule of law. The supremacy of God is widely understood as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what our founders understood in terms of this nation. And this isn't about, one faith or another. This is about the fundamental principle of Christian values that have been embedded in those statements and across the brass and glass of this nation. It's all over the place, and it's attempting to be erased. But the problem that we have in Canada is that this agenda to erase that legacy is disconnecting us from the value framework that says true freedom. If you want to talk about God and freedom, and not having God shoved down Canadians' throats, true freedom is based on the understanding of a God that gives people the right to reject him and reject his existence. Right? And that is actually what we understand in the value framework of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. It's that our understanding in our nation and the application of elevating a Judeo-Christian value framework allows people to reject the existence of God, which is fine. But to say that there's no Judeo-Christian value framework in our nation leaves us in a moral vacuum, which is why we've got drag queens reading pornography to kids. And it's okay, because no one can say that that's wrong, because we're not going to protect. It's a violation of the innocence of our children. So we've got to reconnect to this framework. And maybe it sounds stuffy, but it doesn't if you're a parent that's having your kid taken away because you don't want to, or you're going to jail because you realized that when you were a kid you made mistakes, but your kid's making a mistake. But in this time they're gonna cut their breasts off. So we need to root our values back in a framework that actually gives us the space to have a conversation. And I just finished writing a book on this in terms of the integration of our values into our government. It's called The Battle for the Soul of Canada, Firing the Forge. And Stephen Harper made a very interesting comment at a Civitas speech in 2003, and he basically said, it's not a pure quote, it's in my book at page 116, but he basically says Canada is being assaulted by a dark moral nihilism, which is a moral vacuum that despises the traditions and values of Western society. And when he made that comment in 2003, it was actually prescient. It was actually so insightful in terms of being in advance of what we're dealing with now. He didn't put it in the language of evil or darkness. He kind of put it in philosophical language. If he had done that, we may have taken more notice and said, these are actually the things that are undermining our nation, going to undermine our nation unless we respond properly. Now we're here. And I think that was a very illuminating discussion. I couple that statement with comments made by a young MP inside the Conservative Party that said the people that came into the Conservative Party, those reformers, those bombastic and embarrassing people that typified the reform era, have now been tamed. The Conservative Party's become a centrist party. Well, those embarrassing people that typified the reform era were most of Western Canada and Canadians, Christians across the country, who connected back into the Conservative Party to actually bring Stephen Harper into power. But the interesting point of that comment is that young MP that said that in 2006 was Pierre Poilievre. So now we're dealing with a situation now where there's a huge value disconnect with the party, and a lot of people within the Conservative movement are simply looking at the Liberals and saying we got to get rid of Justin Trudeau. But the deconstruction of the country is not being stopped by Pierre Poilievre. And so now, why is there a new party? Because I'm a patriot, and I believe that Canada is to be a sovereign nation, and it's not to be migrated into a post-national globalist model of governance. It's supposed to have a close link between the people and the authority of the people to influence government through a democratic process. And so when the people jerk the chain, the elected officials feel it. In a post-nationalist model, they can pull on that chain all day. Their governors are somewhere else, and it's somebody else that aren't even Canadians. And that's the problem with this UN agenda that we're being signed up for with the WHO in relation to the declaration of a next pandemic, how Canadians are treated, and what the health applications are in terms of care for Canadians, or treatment, maybe, let's use that word, is going to be determined by Tedros in the WHO. And we have nothing to do with his ideological agenda, and he certainly hasn't been elected by Canadians. And these issues have to be stopped. We have to bring Canada back, take Canada back for Canadians.
Can't argue with that either. About this by-election, is the expectation then you're going to get maybe 5th or 6th, or what would be a good benchmark for you at this point?
I don't know.
This first election?
I think the vote's one thing. I think that the discussion and the platform for the party is maybe the biggest trophy. I don't know what the outcomes will be. I think that normally when I look at the polling in this riding, there's 120,000 people or something like that. And normally there's about 40,000 that vote. And in by-elections it's less. So you can have 30,000 people in this by-election deciding who the next MP is. And so my argument has been, this is a by-election. There's a general election coming up in the next year and a half. Give me a test drive, and let me actually be an advocate for these issues and discussions across the nation, and create change that is going to bring our country back to the country that we love and away from the chaos that's been created. That's quite a compelling argument that people are hearing. So we'll see. I don't know how to speculate that. It's pretty rare, I think, in a lot of ways, for a new party to show up, especially one that's, they've never heard of the person before. But as I've connected, I've seen light switch on in these conversations. So we'll see. We'll see.
Oh, just a comment. One of the viewers said, Tedros makes my skin crawl, not even a medical doctor. So you've got an ally there. I want to give you the last word. Is there anything that you wanted to share that I haven't thought to ask about or we haven't discussed yet?
I just think that Canadians need to get out of their muscle memory when it comes to elections and our government, and look at these deeper issues and ask the question, if people feel that Justin Trudeau is wrecking our nation, and there's this sense of where has my country gone, which was so typified in the energy around the convoy and what happened afterwards, and even the return to remnants of truth that we're seeing through the federal court judgment that was issued in terms of the invocation of the emergency powers. There's a sense of justice arising because things are being, articulated as being wrong in the past. And so there's these embers that are out there in the country. I think that people need to look and they need to say, where was Pierre Poilievre in relation to protecting our kids? Where was Pierre Poilievre in the 2 years of lockdowns that we had? Part of where he was advocating for vaccines that we didn't have. And where are we now in relation to dealing with the jump in unexpected deaths? Where is the discussion of truth? Where is the discussion around the reset, around the post-nation state agenda, around Agenda 2030 that's going on and being implemented across our municipalities and provincial governments? It's like corrosively embedding itself into the fabric of our country. There's no discussion about that. And so we can't just do muscle reflex voting. We need to look and say, we need to be Canadians that are thinking as patriots. We've got to rally to truth, to justice and freedom, and have the courage to have the real conversations, even if maybe we don't want to take the time, or even if they rankle us a bit, because it's so much easier for us just to be polite Canadians. We are going to lose this country. It is sliding left so quickly that the freedom that we've been born into and is our heritage, we probably both have uncles or grandfathers that fought to defend it overseas, and yet the same forces are corroding and undermining it and deconstructing it here in Canada now. And this is our watch. We need to stand up. Many Canadians across the country are standing up, and standing up means you demand that the real conversations are had. And this is what this party is about. I never do a presentation in a room full of Canadians where I don't have an open mic and let people ask questions. You see what other parties do with that. They never do. They deliver a little soundbite and they walk out of the room. And we need to get back to accountability, to critical thinking, and actually see our country preserved for the next 150 years. And that's why I called the book Firing the Forge, because we actually have to reforge the nation, because there's so many balance of power, broken issues that have led to the compromises we've seen, with bank accounts being frozen and a supply of drugs on our streets. Have you ever thought that isn't it an amazing question, or have you thought about this, that we can freeze a mother's bank account in Chilliwack, BC, a single mom's bank account in Chilliwack, BC, for donating $50 to the convoy, but we can't stop organized crime and clumps of money moving around in our banking system?
Oh, your point is well made. And as far as having open mics, I have seen Maxime Bernier do it. And when Trudeau did it on his countrywide tour, I think it backfired a bit.
Mm-hmm.
This is where we got the term "people kind."
Mm-hmm.
One of the
All right, yeah.
said that, and there were some other kind of strange confrontations.
Yeah.
So, but I agree that the message is often very controlled. So
Mm-hmm.
I want to let you get back to the door knocking. Grant Abraham, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Lee, thank you for the time. Yeah, thank you.
All the best.
Okay, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't know how to sign off. Oh, there it is. Okay.
There we go.